Okay, welcome to One Stop Co-op Shop. Steve and we're here to do another chat this morning. So I'm excited to talk about games with you. So this is our weekly co-op chat where we focus on cooperative news and have a fun discussion topic. This week's gonna be a little bit different than normal weeks because I don't see any cooperative crowdfunding games. So for this coming week, I think there's a few coming later, but yeah, it's interesting because I feel like there were just tons and tons of cooperative games, tons of great games to back, and right now, I mean, from a cooperative standpoint, I think we're a bit of a lull, which is nice. I could use the break in crowdfunding games and stuff like that, but doesn't mean that's the only thing we have to talk about. As you can see on the screen, we have Marvel Zombicide, which was announced. This was announced on Quackalope's channel and Board Game Co. So the guys do awesome work. Do recommend checking out their channels if you're looking for more content. But yeah, we really don't know a whole lot about this game. Basically, what we know is what I have on screen right there. We have a giant. Uh, I'm not gonna call it miniature because it's giant, so I like to call it bigature of a zombie Galactus. So this is going to. Oh yes, no, yeah, still a lot of solo games. Yeah, there's definitely lots of solo games for backing. I tend to try to focus on the cooperative ones just to keep my sanity intact because there's just so many games to cover. If I were to cover every cooperative and solo game every week, that would probably be a whole segment in itself, easy. So, but yeah, so Zombicide. So this was a big announcement. This is the 50th Kickstarter for Simon, Kumin or not. And like I said, we don't know much about this other than we have a giant Galactus and it's Zombicide. So I want to talk about this a little bit before we get into the discussion topic about narrative games. Um, I know Zombicide gets a lot of flack, but honestly, I think it's a fun game. I really like it. Like, it's not going to be like a huge, strategy and number crunch brain burn thing, but I think the system's really fun. I think it's really fun to house rule as well. Like, we did do a play earlier. Was it really this week? Man, time flies by fast. Anyway, we played Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles with Zombicide with some house rules, and I'll plan to do a few more. Show some of the other ones that we did to tweak that system. It's really cool. But here's the thing. Oh yeah, it's a giant kid-sized statue. It really is. It really is snow. Like, so Zombicide, how it works is you are generally normal people, humans, or a lot of times they have just regular let's say IP type characters, where they have got looks like Mr. and Mrs. Smith is in there, for example. It looks like that the Big Bang Theory type characters. Then there's a lot of like just regular humans in there. And in that game, you are running around taking out zombies with crowbars and pistols, and you go and looting. You find Molotov cocktails and goalie masks and all sorts of fun like loot stuff. It's very cool from that standpoint. And there's different versions of it. There's a fantasy, a sci-fi, and a western as well. Now, what I'm not sure about for Marvel Zombicide is this formula of beating up zombies, going to a building and getting loot, getting gear, and leveling up, which is fun. It doesn't really fit the Marvel theme, in my mind. So I'm curious what's going to happen here. I can see one of two things. I can see them taking Marvel superheroes, slapping. Actually, let's say three things. They could take the Marvel superheroes, slap it on their existing formula, and then you've got Marvel superheroes with their own powers, which could line to superheroes, go and get loot and leveling up. That would be a thematic break. I don't think that would work. I'm hoping that's not what it is. We'll see what happens. Because it doesn't make sense for like Spider-Man to go get a pistol and start using it, right? Or Captain America go get a crowbar. I mean, crowbar maybe. Um, and Snow mentioned her. There's some comic that deals with Marvel zombies, which is true. There is such a thing as Marvel zombies for sure. Uh, where the superheroes are zombies. In fact, if you've watched Disney Plus, there's a What If series where they cover a lot of interesting what if what's her name? Oh crap! Captain America's love interest became Captain America instead of Captain Britain, which is really cool. So yeah, they could tie it into that, which is interesting because that way the supers are zombies, which is the other way of doing it, right? So supers are zombies, and then you could play as potentially regular humans, like Agents of Shield, for example, and then going around getting loot would make some sense in that regard. That's another way of doing it. The other way is if they take kind of the Zombicide label and they change up the mechanics, which is what I'm hoping is going to happen. Because I feel like it'd be really cool to have a leveling up system that is more robust, because honestly, with superheroes, they have a wide range of superpowers, but they're not really loot focused. Like, they might have certain gear, for example, Captain America might have his shield, Iron Man might have his armor, stuff like that, but it's not really loot focused. And so Zombicide is heavily loot focused with some leveling. So I hope they flip that around. So that's what I'm hoping for. Hoping for it's a feel of Zombicide, but not the exact system in the superhero. So you can play as the supers doing this, because that would be amazing. It could be like Snow mentioned, like maybe we're going against the superheroes as zombies, which is another way of doing it. And when you're playing as normal humans, that could work. Or it could be just pasting on the superheroes into the existing Zombicide mechanics, which I don't think would work very well. So yeah, and there's a question: if they can do that to a name Zombicide, but it will make millions whatever they do. So whatever exactly. That's what I'm wondering, because like I could see the marketing department like, cool, let's use this word Zombicide because we know it. People know that brand and they're going to latch onto it, right? So it could be one of those marketing things, right? Where like this, we've had that earlier this year with Descent. So we had Descent Legends in the Dark, which is not the same as Descent Second Edition, for example. So it's the same like branding. It's a different system. So we'll see what happens. Yeah, gee golly, exactly. Like Pandemic, wow, by using the Pandemic label, exactly, changing the mechanics. That's another great example of that. So that's what I'm hoping is going to happen here. Because, like I said, I enjoy Zombicide. I think it's a great beer and pretzels game. It's fun to really fun to house rule. A lot of things you can do with the system, but I don't think it fits the superhero theme as we've seen it so far. So we will see what happens with that one. But yeah, Zombicide, and this one we're going to see it's going to get launched pretty soon here. I think it might even be like in November still. So hopefully we'll get some news really quick. I don't know. We'll cover this more when we get more information, because it's pretty exciting. We love Marvel, as you know. Just played with Peter last night in Marvel Champions, and he's enjoying Crisis Protocol, and I'm playing Legendary and United all the time too. So yeah, so that's a good point, Snow. Simon kept the Zombicides pretty much the same so far. Yeah, they were like the modern one. They kept evolving the system and changing it from the base one, but it still was set up in that modern feel. And then the what's it called, the fantasy one. The name escapes me right now. I know Green Horde's one of the sets. Black Plague. They actually changed some of the core mechanics in that one. And the same thing with the space one, which also Invaders, I believe it's called. And Western also changed it a bit as well. So they're all fairly similar, honestly, but there are some core differences of how they approach different systems in that one. So, but it's not wildly different, is what I think Snow is saying, and I definitely agree with that. So I'm hoping this one I would think would have to be fairly wildly different. But we'll see what happens. Okay. That is honestly all the news I have for today. Just hey, an image and some musings on what's gonna happen with this game. So I'm going to reserve judgment until I see the rule set, because that's going to be a deciding factor on what's going to happen here. So, in my opinion. Okay, let's talk about narrative types. Oops, wrong one. Okay, there we go. So, lots of ways to approach narrative in games, and some of them could be better than others in different cases. So, oh yes, no, you did mention there are also 2 different Galactus statues floating around. I did hear that. I haven't seen it yet. I don't know what that means. I don't know if it's like different pieces, like maybe because right now let me pull that back up real quick so people can take a closer look. So if you look closely, that is actually zombie Galactus. You can see his face is actually falling apart, and his helmet is actually broken. So this is definitely the zombie form of him. So I don't know if it's going to be like a zombie in a non-zombie form. One thing that I'm still hoping happens is Marvel United. They did at the end of the last season, or last campaign, they did introduce Fantastic Four with Silver Surfer, and so once that was introduced, a lot of people are like clamoring, like, "Ooh, I want a Galactus for United," and so I mean that was just all over the place. People were really, really excited for that prospect, and I hope that now that they have this Galactus miniature, they could potentially implement that in some other games as well. And I don't know if it could be. That's another thing I heard as well as a rumor is while they're marketing this as Marvel Zombicide, if they wanted, they could also have weird add-ons where, oh yeah, we have this a giant Galactus miniature for Death May Die, just as a add-on to it potentially, or another Galactus miniature for Marvel Unite, for example. So it could be something weird like that. They could think it's a stretch, but we'll see what happens. But yeah, I heard there's 2 different statues as well. I also have a giant statue at home from HeroClick, so I love me the Galactus. So yeah, get back to this topic. Talk about narrative games. So there's a lot of different ways of approaching it. There is more of the scripted approach. There is kind of a emergent narrative approach, and then there is a kind of a choose your own adventure approach is how I would say it. So we'll see. There's just a lot of different ways to do it. Yeah, yes, no, the 50th Kickstarter and knowing Simon, there it's gonna be a crazy Kickstarter for sure. So, but yeah, let's talk about the different types of narratives and like there's good and bad for each of these. I would say one of them, let's like a choose your own adventure would be the Legacy of Dragonhold. Is one of them, right? Where in that game you are reading through a book and you come up to a part of the book and it says, hey, if you have the skill or if you want to climb the rope to get on top of the hill, or do you want to prep I'll go hide around the corner and ambush the approaching enemies, right? And so based upon that, you'll go to one side or the other. I just played Skyrim that has this as well, where you're reading card, and depending if you'll succeed or fail at it, and oftentimes there's a choice at the end. The choice will tell you to draw one card versus the other, and so you can branch off from that. So that's more of the choose your own adventure style approach. There is more of the scripted approach, which I think honestly a lot of games do, where especially it's of a campaign game where this is the first level of the campaign, move the second level campaign, third, fourth, so on and so forth, and games like that could be, for example, oh yeah, it's another mention. Choose your own adventure, similar to RPG tabletop. Um, kind of. So I think that's more of. I think RPGs tabletop is a different scenario. I'll get to that in a second, but yeah. So something scripted could be something like we played Rackbusters, which is hey, this is the missions. You just play them in order. When you're done, right? Um, a lot of games do that. I know there is the what's that game coming up? Tales from Dragonhold. Yeah, that dungeon crawl does that. A lot of dungeon crawls just are do campaign 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or whatever it is, right? Then there is more of a emergent narrative, and probably the strongest example of that one for me would be Iridia, because that one you are in this world, you can do whatever you want, and as you do it, the game will naturally tell stories. Because oh yeah, I went to the mountain, talked to this person. He told me there was some gold out in the woods, and I went to a treasure hunt and I found all this stuff. And so like, it's not saying you don't have to do it in that order, and you don't have to do necessarily what it's trying to say. It's just that the cards evoke this narrative, and you make the connections in your mind. One of the things that we did, speaking of zombies, back in the day, I played a lot of Last Night on Earth, which is a flying frog game. That game has a lot of fun horde tropes. That was fun to explore, and in that you would potentially run into like the sheriff is protecting the town while from the zombies as they're approaching, as he holding fort while people are searching behind him. And so like that was just in the game. You're doing actions, but those actions lead to these fun stories you remember. And yes, so Snow's got it called out. So scripted tells you a coherent story, which is great because the story could be well written or poorly written, of course. So but it's nice that it all links together. While emergent narrative fills in the gaps, right? So, but you're doing that aspect of it for the most part. Now, you mentioned RPG. So RPGs can vary a lot in how they're approached, and it really depends on your DM or a GM that does it. So normally, at least for my approach when I've GM games, is I like to have here's the situation, the plot point that the players are working with. I've got plans A, B, and C that are different narrative paths they can go on. But I honestly, it's more of an actual open world how I approach it. I don't try to funnel people into one versus the other, because normally I say I have plans A, B, C set up, and normally the players choose plans F, for example, like just something way off the wall, and then I have to like figure out, well, how would this affect the story that's in the background, so which is really fun. So that one's not even, it's not scripted, it's not choose your own adventure, it's just, I don't know what RPGs what that's in their own category on their own, I would say. Gee golly, emergent narrative in games seems to be less either or and more yes or no in the choices a player make. It could be. It can be less either or and more yes or no. Not sure if I'm following exactly what you're saying there, G golly. So, because to me, I think that's kind of the same thing on what you're doing for the emergent narrative. Now, if we're talking about like how these are implemented in games, that's kind of the fun thing to talk about. So we talk about Legacy of Dragonholt. It is literally a book with different paragraphs you jump to. Skyrim and Fallout are very much choose your own adventures, and those are ones you do go to different cards in the deck, which I think works really well. Um, so those are good ways of doing. Now the book's nice because books are easy to manage, of course. The problem with a book potentially is if you are scanning through it, you might see a passage or a paragraph you shouldn't read, for example. So it's not a huge deal if you keep the labels really nice and easy to find. You can normally glance over stuff you're not supposed to read. The cards are nice because it keeps all the stuff hidden, but now you've got another thing to manage. Cards to keep track of run the right spot. If you drop the box, cards go everywhere. It could be a mess for sure. So I mentioned emergent narrative has different forms. It can be pretty much combined with scripted scenario or choose your own adventure, which is true. So this is where the discussion gets really interesting because emergent narrative can often be player dependent, right? I don't know what the right formula is to enable that for people. So here's G Golly's thing. Either or is scripted because you're going to choose one, but yes or no is more. I want to tell this story now, or I'm going to look for a different story. Ah, gotcha. Yeah, so what you're saying is I'm in this environment, I'm in this quest. There is this goal I can do. I can do it right now, or I can do it later, right? So that's the more yes or no. I can do this element, but it's always going to be there, right? Either or means I have to make a choice, and then my choice means it it's going to push me towards one or the other. And I think that's a really good example of Gigali because Skyrim, for example, does that either or for sure because you have a choice. Generally, if you don't choose the other choice, that option is not available to you. But that's a good point. I think a lot of people do the choose your own adventure type stuff, like you mentioned. Um, yes, no, it's a bit harder to define exactly what it does because scripted, you can say you have a book with a written story. With choose your own adventure, you just have branching paths in the story. Right. Right. It gets, yeah, there's a couple of ways of approaching it for that one. And and it's interesting because some people will like the narrative in games. Others are that's a big turnoff, right? Because I'm not there to read a book or read a lot of passages, and you don't want to ruin the pacing of the game because that's one of the biggest issues I run into when playing big narrative games is to get a good narrative. Sometimes I feel like having a big wall of text will help with that because it like ties in all these elements. It really sets the scene and the mood and the different characters, introduces the character balance. But the problem is, then you have one person sitting at a table reading however long it takes to while we're just waiting around for listen to the story. That could be fun for some people, good maybe not for others. And I feel like when sitting down to play a game, your expectation is to play the game. And so when you have these big epic stories, or it can detract from that. And so I think Madara is a really good example of that, where the story's actually good. I actually like the story a lot on that one. But that one, when I played with Barrett, we we didn't read the story when we were playing the game. It was, hey, here's a book. Go read the chapter on your own, and when we meet back, we'll have that knowledge when we sit down and play the game immediately, which I think worked really, really well. Um, Snow mentioned you can have separate quests and just pick and choose if you want to do some of them or not, or just play a game without any quests. Yes, which is nice because when that narrative is not as ingrained in the game, if you are the type of group that doesn't care for that narrative, you can just play mechanically. You're like, okay, something's happening. I don't really care about that. I'm just gonna play the game, which I did for when I was playing Isofaring Guard, because that one there's a lot of narrative elements, a lot of spoilers on that potentially, but you could actually just move from node to node to node and explore and just play the game normally. You're missing some elements, of course, but that one is capable of doing that as well. But yeah, so that is the tricky part because like is to get involved that really good story to get that there you really have to a lot of times I've seen implemented you got this big old story that does detract from the pacing of the game. Yeah, exactly, Gigali. I play with people who just don't want to read or listen to flavor text, which is exactly right. Like it's just okay, whatever. Let's keep playing. Let's just jump into it. Which it can add to the experience, but also detract. That's where I feel like the emergent narrative aspect is best because you could have quick injections of story, but still focus on what you're there for. That's to play the game. This is the same thing with setup and tear down games. Same thing as map setup drives me nuts when I'm playing a game and I have to reveal a room and I have to go fetch tile 478, and I have to take a break of what we're actually playing to go set this whole board up and then start resume playing again. It has the same effect to me as stopping to read a long narrative story. Like I want to maintain that pacing of the game until we're done, right? And so I feel like the narrative, if you're going to do that, it should be is best at the beginning or at the end of the play. It says, I think it separates narrative-driven games from games with narrative. That's true. The latter you can ignore. The former is tied to the mechanisms. I agree with that. Yeah. So can you play the game without reading the story or not? That's a good one. Because sometimes it might not make sense why the mechanics in the game without that narrative element. And I think example, without getting to any spoilers on that, would be like Pandemic Legacy. I think did a lot of that, where there are a lot of mechanics introduced in that game as you play it, but they're there because of something the story is doing. And if you were to skip out on the story, it would break the game a lot. In not that mechanically it works, but just the whole experience, right, of that game. It just would fall apart incredibly fast. And you mentioned Snow. Narrative heavy games I kind of avoid because usually the lack of mechanisms department, and when you don't care for the story written, there's just no game there. That can happen for sure. Yeah. So it's really you need to find the game that's going to still draw you into it mechanically and our theme at least too. While if the story falls flat, that's fine. But yeah, I think that leads to the emergent narrative because that is just up to the players. I've had so much fun just playing a game and like the gameplays I remember the most are the ones where something happens in the game. It's not being read to us, and I still remember that. I remember in U-Boat, for example, playing with Elijah, where oh yeah, we had awesome we did awesome attack vector. We launched like 3 torpedoes simultaneously, sunk all the ships, and then escort came to find us. And me being the smart captain I am, decided to let's keep going forward at a slow pace. With which, of course, we went right where they dropped in depth charges and we blew up. So, like, that was not dictated to us. That was just a fun moment in the game, and I still remember to this day. This story evolved in my mind, and it stuck with me. Same thing with playing role playing games. Like I remember most of the moments in the role playing games that I remember are the ones that were not read to me, not scripted. And so I think those are the stories that really get you. So it's a tough one. Like I enjoy the narrative games because it's fun to see the story. It's fun to see the world that you're in and see how the characters interact. And it's almost like learning a new IP, intellectual property, which is cool. But for me, like the main thing that drives me is the emergent narratives. Like, can I inject my own story in it? And that kind of ties back to like Zombicide, right? Where we've played games and I've taken notes and being able to construct a story as a newsletter to everyone who played the game afterwards. Because we used to do that for Halloween, like, hey, play a game of Zombicide, and I'll turn to a newspaper clipping at the end to say, oh, look, zombie breaks out in town, whatever happens. So And yes, emergent narrative becomes a unique situation that many other people may not experience, which is true because, like I said earlier, you could have some people that do see that narrative. It does link him to the game, and others that don't. Now that gets interesting because it does get into a little bit of thematics too, right? Because we're talking about theme versus mechanics, and I tend to really like thematic games, mostly because the themes are generally interesting to me, but it helps a lot with learning the game and teaching the game, understanding what you're doing in the game. Because it's easier for me to remember the rules of the game and all the steps if there is a reason to them, aka a theme to them. And so that is, I can say I know some people who can play without the theme and just play with the mechanics. That's not me at all. I definitely need some type of theme to help me remember it. I mean, I can play an abstract game, but I'm not gonna remember it. That's what it comes down to it. But that is something a little bit different than like what you're saying here, which you could have a narrative that you can skip over, for example, and still play the game. Yeah, narratives like a scripted narrative is like discussing a book, which is still nice. The story will be the same for all the people, which is true. It doesn't change for different plays. And BJJ Zombie, I do like a good story, but the gameplay is what I want to remember along with it. A great fight against the boss stays with you forever. Exactly right. Yep, exactly right. So it sounds like we're all kind of on the same page. It seems like some of us may not like the narrative, but no matter what, we need to have the gameplay be there, be good for us, because we're here to play games, right? Some people are more natural storytellers than others, which can impact the enjoyment of the emergent narrative if they don't see the story, which is true, especially if you're doing dialogue in a game. Like if you sit down and do voices, like if you're good at that, I'm not. I try, but I'm not good at it. That can have a big impact on your experience of the game for sure. Like I played with some really get back to RPGs, some really good DMs that could do awesome voices, and there were characters that like things happened in the game, and we felt for them. So it was fun. I do like theme, even if it's just a graphic. It gives the incentive to create the stories. Yeah, for sure, for sure. Cool. And yeah, so role player adventure has a bit of that story element in it as well. Um, the other game I was going to mention as a solo one that's pretty cool. That's pretty cool for a narrative aspect is Nemo's War, because that one you're drawing event cards, and these event cards can tell a story as you're playing the game, which is kind of cool. And I feel like that's the big way of how I like a lot of story be interjected in my games is have these events that pop up. V Sabotage is a great one because in that one you've got a huge deck of event cards that are wildly different. They're actually some of them are based on real historical events, which is kind of fun. But like we're creeping around and I guess the base was on movie night. They were watching movies, so everyone was watching movies, so we were able to creep around and take over the base before the movie's over, which is fun. I'll get soon one narrative game driven game, but it's supposed to be mostly emergent narrative Force of Radagast. Or Radgast, yeah. I don't remember that one. But yes, we have a lot of narrative games here. They're fun. We like them. But yeah, I kind of want to talk about the different styles of narrative elements and how that can work in games. And yeah, I think that's all I was going to mention in this one, this chat, short chat, because honestly, there wasn't a whole lot to talk about from news aspect. so, uh, and this was a interesting topic we want to cover for this week. Slavic mythology game. That's cool. That's very cool. Oh, I do remember that one. That was interesting. Ooh, Raphael, that's a great point. Core Space, great emergent narrative game. Not for everyone though. Yeah, that one has a really cool table presence where you are moving around like a space base. Which is interesting because like that one, I would almost argue the emergent narrative is help driven by the components in that game, right? Which I know a lot of people complain about potentially like the extra fluffing games, like the having miniatures, for example. But honestly, some of that stuff will, for especially for some people, draw them into games to help tell that story more. If I'm moving, it's different. Like if I'm moving around a board as a character versus if I'm moving around an area in my mind, that may have different impact for different people for the emergent narrative. Cool. You guys are awesome. Oh, Machina Arcana is emergent narrative too. Like there is a story in the scenario, but it's most of a setting, and most narrative comes from playing, which is true. Yeah, that's another good example of emergent narrative and table presence. Yep. Definitely helps for sure. Excellent. Well, I'm going to end this one at this point a little bit early because I know we don't have a lot to talk about for news, but we will have a lot to talk about in the near future because, as a reminder, we had the fun Zombicide kind of announcement earlier this week, which really did tell us anything. We're getting more information that I'm assuming next week on that game. But we still have something really exciting to look forward to. That's going to happen today on the main channel. My computer are going to be announcing their new game publicly to everyone. So that's going to be awesome. They're a team up with Blacklist, so Blacklist is going to do an interview with them, and I believe there's a playthrough as well lined up for the big reveal. So look for that a few hours from now on the other channel. So definitely check that one out. So it'd be awesome. I'm really excited. I'm really excited to see what everyone's reaction to that one is. So, but cool. That's going to end the chat for this morning. Yeah, stay tuned. Hope that I hope the Blacklist thing went. We talked about that last night because I know Peter and I played Marvel Champions last night, and we talked about that issue. If people aren't aware, Blacklist has I feel like 6 or so games that are in flux on delivery. Like they're being produced for sure. The games are coming. It's just with shipping issues currently, and just everyone's having production having issues with getting things out the door and moving. It's tough to go back a game when you have 6 games that haven't been delivered, and that's what we're really worried about. But I hope that's not going to impact what my computer have. But we'll see what happens. There is going to be available very soon. So yeah, the games are allegedly in the warehouse. Yeah, we've seen the pictures. Yeah, so they're there. Just gotta get on the boats, and I don't know. We'll see what happens. I know I'm waiting for a few things for them. Like I played Contra. Contra was really fun for them. From them, I didn't buy that one yet, but I do have Street Masters and miniatures. Some miniatures coming from them. So because I love my Street Masters. Cool. Anyway, like I said, a few hours. Take a look at that on the main channel, and that's gonna end for today. Thanks to everyone for joining. We'll see you at the next stop. Bye bye.